Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Earth Laws Month. Tonight, we're delighted to be bringing to you a rather sensational human being who has spent many, many years, decades, dare I say, recording the sounds of nature and learning from his deep listening of the living world, to the living world. I'm just going to share screen for 1 second so I can acknowledge country with a beautiful photo of my local water lilies. Okay, so yes, welcome to our lovely session tonight. I can't wait to hear Andrew give us his talk and share some of his recordings. But before I do that, let me acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the really beautiful lands of the Yagara Turrbal people. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present and the emerging leaders and young ones who are taking on their responsibilities to care for country and to care for each other. I'd like to acknowledge the remarkable civilizational and governance culture and system that helped people care for country since time immemorial. And I'd also like, as always, to acknowledge the ongoing impacts and legacy of colonization and our own personal and professional commitment inside the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and our sister organisations Future Dreaming and NINA to play a part in decolonizing our hearts and minds and trying to play a humble role in contributing to a different future, a better future for all of us on this gorgeous continent. So as has become the tradition in Zoom land, if you would like to pop into the chat whose country you're on, where you are today, how the weather is turning or not in your part of the world, please do pop it in the chat. It's always lovely for everyone to read who's here, where you are, and what you're up to. And finally, just a quick plug for Earth Laws Month. We're at the halfway mark. We've still got 2 weeks of awesome activities and events. If you haven't seen our program, do visit our website, earthlaws.org.au/ELM2022, and we'll pop a few links into the chat as we go along. But without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce Andrew Skeoch, a sound recording artist, and I hope he's going to talk about his recently completed book as well, and basically hand over to you, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that introduction. And yeah, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you this evening from Dja Dja Wurrung lands in central Victoria, and we live on some box ironbark woodlands, which I'm going to let you have a listen to in a moment. Before I begin though, well, what I'd like to talk to you about this evening is listening to the natural world. And I think of this not just in a sort of natural history sense, but in a deeper sense. I want to start with some of that natural history and just give you a sense of how to listen to the nature sounds, bird song and frog calls and so on around you. But mainly spend time on a deeper sense of listening to how nature works, the actual functioning of natural systems through what we can hear in the world around us. And I'll begin by telling you a story because this speaks to this concept of deeper listening, and it goes back nearly 30 years to when I was very first starting to do sound recordings. I was in Western New South Wales with my partner, Sarah, and I was first discovering this world of waving microphones at things and enjoying what I was hearing. And we were on a national park. There was an Aboriginal man who was working as part of the staff there. He was a fairly quiet fellow. He didn't speak very much, but we got the sense that he was a very deep soul, and he was incredibly connected to the land around him, which was part of his family's and his groups. This was their land. And one afternoon he came over to us and he said, I'm going to go for a drive down to the southern end of the range. Would you like to come with me? And at that time, we hadn't really had much contact with Aboriginal people, so we very gladly accepted. And for the next half an hour, we drove in silence along rutted tracks in a four-wheel drive engine, car rattling along these tracks, and until the track eventually moved in towards the range, and it finished at the entrance to a rather magnificent gorge. And we turned off the engine and got out of the car. The silence was profound. And I immediately started listening. I was picking up white-plumed honeyeaters in the tree canopy nearby, and there was a willy wagtail calling up amongst the rocks. And this Aboriginal man said to us, we're just going to sit quietly for a little while. Maybe you'd like to go and sit on those rocks over there. And I said, that'll be great. It'll give me a chance just to tune into nature. And he looked a bit puzzled, and as though he wasn't quite sure what to say about that, or whether to say anything at all. And then he said to me, he said, no, mate, that's not why we do this. And now I was puzzled, and I said, I'm sorry, I don't understand. He said, this is not a time for you to tune into nature. This is a time for nature to tune into you. Find out what kind of person you are. Find out what kind of fellow you are. Find out whether you can be trusted, because if you can, nature will start talking to you. It'll start telling you things, important things. That experience, those words, really at the very beginning of my listening to nature, have stayed with me. And at the time, I didn't really understand them. I've come to realize the kind of disconnect in our own culture, in Western culture, and that these words really go to the heart of it. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how we can listen more deeply and how we can hear what nature's actually saying to us. So at this point, I'm going to jump into screen share. Okay, is everyone is that all right? Is that working for everybody? Okay, cool. So let's begin with some listening, and I'm going to play you a minute of sound from where I live in central Victoria. So, as I said, it's box ironbark woodland, and this gives me an opportunity to introduce you to spectrograms. If you're not familiar with them, a spectrogram is a visual representation of what you're hearing, where time is represented horizontally, and then the frequency of sound is on the vertical axis, from low frequency sounds to very high sounds, possibly beyond the range of your hearing on the vertical axis, and the intensity of sound at any particular time and frequency is shown by the intensity of the plot. So as you listen through, hopefully the technology will synchronize, and the cursor will track through roughly in time with the sound. Sometimes it staggers a little bit. But just see if you can listen to the sounds, the different species. If you've got headphones, it is in stereo, and we're broadcasting hopefully in stereo. See if you can synchronize what your ears, what you're hearing with your ears, and what the spectrogram is showing you. Okay, here we go. How's that working? Are we tracking okay? Getting a great, thank you everyone. Now, if you're a natural history audience, I would spend some time talking about the species that you can hear on that 1 minute recording. Here they are. I talk about how each of them not only has their own unique vocalizations, their own whole repertoire of sounds that they use, but the purposes of those sounds in terms of their lives, their lifestyle, the different communicative purposes, and also why they use the sounds that they do, why the acoustics of the sound facilitates the purpose to which the particular animal uses them. But I want to spend some more time on some other issues this evening. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to bypass that for the moment. But just to say that this is really how I began listening. I was thinking about identifying species by their sound and whether it's a contact call, is this a home ranging call, is it an alarm call, what's, you know, you're sort of, I think of it as hearing the stories of nature. You're hearing the stories of the bush, all these different species doing their own things around you. And for many, many years, I was learning to kind of decode those stories. And it's one of the joys of listening to nature. And then one particular species just had me listening in a completely different way. It was a Teresian crow. They're very curious species, very intelligent species. This one is kind of wondering what a fork is doing jammed into a fence post. They, every morning on this particular occasion, when I would put my microphones out, the way that I often do it is I put a microphone rig out on a tripod on a recorder with a long battery, and I just leave it out in the field to do its thing, to have its little adventure and pick up audio. And then later on, I'll go back and pick it up later in the morning. I'll start out at maybe 4 o'clock in the morning and then come back later and pick it up. And I'd be listening back to these recordings, and I would find that the local crows had often come around the microphone just to check it out. And sometimes I'm listening on headphones and I can just imagine the bush that it landed in. I can hear it fly in. But on this particular occasion, on one of these mornings, a bird did something unexpected. It flew in and it landed on the ground. It sounds like just a few meters away from the microphone, and then it hops over to the point where it's standing right underneath the microphone itself, and then it begins vocalizing. For the first time, I realized that I'm not just hearing species, bird calls, behaviors. I'm hearing another mind, a mind that shares the same world that I do, but it lives in it in a really different way, a way that is kind of alien to me, but it's not that alien that I can't empathize with it, that I can't hear its curiosity, that I can't hear its kind of disappointment. Nothing here, moving along. You know, we are surrounded by other living entities. And when we hear their voices, we're hearing their life spirit. And this was the first time that this occurred to me, that instead of hearing a soundscape, I was actually hearing a kind of a mindscape, if you like, of other living organisms in the world in a way that I could empathize. And this empathy is really important. Empathic listening. We do it with each other when we listen deeply to each other, particularly somebody whose life experience or beliefs are kind of different to ours. And we really have to open our hearts to hear what they say. But with nature, we think it's alien. We think it's something else. It's something different. We don't understand it. but we can if we use empathic listening. And by doing so, we extend what's called our circle of care. We start including the other than human, in our own human experience, in our own human world. So this was the first step that I took into what I now think of as deep listening, of not just listening to nature out there, but listening to it as part of who we are. And this got me thinking about how nature actually works, because, you know, this 1 minute of audio that I played you in the beginning, you're not just hearing a whole pile of species, you're hearing all their interactions, you're hearing things going on, you're hearing the whole ecosystem. And so I started to think about the way that the ecosystem functions. And as a sound recordist, the dawn chorus is one of the most obvious things to record. It's why sound recordists get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go out recording, is to catch that early avian activity. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about how the dawn chorus works, because it's really quite fascinating. So the first thing is that the dawn chorus is not every bird species participates in the dawn chorus. Most of the ones that do are from a group called the passerines, or the songbirds. So there are a lot of other non-passerine species like waterbirds and seabirds, owls, raptors, pigeons. These are non-passerines. The songbirds are small perching birds, and what's really distinctive about them in terms of sound is that they learn their vocalizations. They have to learn their vocalizations from their parents, and they actually practice them in a really cute behavior called subsong. It's kind of like baby talk. They'll sit in the middle of the bush and they'll just chatter away and practice their repertoire. The other thing about the dawn chorus is that it's given in the dark at a time when the acoustic environment is really still and quiet on most days. Sound transmits over a long distance. And coming back to the fact that they have to learn their vocalizations, that they do creates a kind of culture of birdsong. And one of the features of it is what is regional dialects. They have accents. They have songs that are peculiar to a particular species in a particular area. And I just want to start by giving you an example of this. So this is a willy wagtail. You're probably familiar with them. They're a common garden bird. This is a dawn chorus from outback Australia. And if you listen, you can hear willy wagtails across the landscape calling in the dark. And wagtails, they're found all around the continent, so they're quite a widely distributed species, and everywhere you go you hear these different regional dialects, but in this location each bird is singing with exactly the same song. Now, the other thing that you can hear there is a process that is mainly heard in the dawn chorus. It's not really heard at other times during the day. It's called counter singing. And it's where individuals of the same species, rather than singing over the top of each other, they give each other space. And so their calls alternate backwards and forwards. You can hear the birds, even though it's a complex community and you're hearing birds off in the distance, you can hear them taking the time to listen as much as they're actually singing. And by having a repertoire which has this regional dialect, they're able to create a sense of community, of knowing who their neighbours are because their neighbours have the correct song. And there's safety in doing this, knowing who your neighbours are. I mean, we can relate to this. But birds actually do this through song, and it's all done in the dawn chorus. So coming back to counter singing, this can be, in some species, an extraordinary behaviour. And one of my favorites is another outback bird. This is the white-fronted honeyeater. I think of it as the pinball machine bird because its repertoire is a complete sound effects library of mechanical bells and whistles and clicks and rattles. And when you have two birds singing in the dawn chorus, they will form what's almost like a synchronized duet. They will alternate their calls backwards and forwards so quickly, and it forms this mesmerizing performance. So just a short example of two birds, these two white-fronted honeyeaters. So the understanding that I was coming to is that birds negotiate their relationships in the dawn. They negotiate their home ranges, where they live. They negotiate, they recognize their neighbors, they interact with their neighbors, and they create communities of the same species so everybody knows who everybody is. And I was familiar with all of this. And at the same time, I was curious about this bird. It's a grey shrike thrush. We have them nesting in our home. As a matter of fact, I've just seen the shrike thrushes this morning. They've got a nest underneath our carport. And for the first time this season, they've come back to check it out and to start a new family. But the thrushes, you're probably familiar with this, has a beautiful, rich, sonorous voice. And they sing in the dawn chorus. I was curious about what they're actually doing, though. I felt as though they're doing something a little bit different, but I just couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. So over a week, I put my microphones out in the front yard to actually listen to our grey shrike thrushes. And I just want to take you through one of those mornings. So the dawn chorus began, as it often does, with wrens and robins and so on. It was probably about 15 or 20 minutes before the great shrike thrush entered, because birds come in a sequence. If you listen over successive mornings in a location, you'll hear that they each have their kind of sequence in the dawn chorus when they come in earlier or later for longer or whatever. So when the grey shrike thrush came in, it was our grey shrike thrush, the one that lives around our home. And it began singing with a single song phrase. Now, shrike thrushes have multiple song phrases in their repertoire, and probably several dozen. And out of that several dozen, our shrike thrush was singing one phrase. And it gave that song phrase every 20 seconds or so. And for a little while, nothing happened. And then the neighboring shrike thrush started responding. And it was doing this counter singing. They were alternating their calls backwards and forwards. But what was really interesting was that out of the repertoire of the neighboring thrushes' calls, it was using exactly the same call. Have a listen. Now, this went on for maybe, I think, about 12, 13 minutes. And then one bird changed the call. It started singing a new phrase, and instantly our bird, the neighboring bird, and some of the other birds in the district who we could now hear had started calling, all changed to this new song phrase. So you can hear there's quite a few of them out across the landscape now. You can hear these birds from sometimes 1 kilometre or more away, and they're all singing the same phrase. Once again, this kept on going for another 10, 12 minutes, and then one bird changed the phrase. But for some reason, it didn't get picked up. I think there were some other birds calling like magpies, and the sound got a bit confused and it wasn't heard, and they kept on going with the same phrase. And then another bird changed the phrase, but that one was heard, and suddenly everybody synchronized around the new phrase. Now, by this time, the dawn chorus was starting to abate a little bit, and there weren't so many other birds calling. So you really can hear that there are grey thrushes right across the landscape who are all singing this new phrase. This made me aware of just how profound the dawn chorus is, that each species has its own way of participating in the dawn chorus to facilitate the interactions of its own kind. And the fact that these birds do this, even though they have to learn their calls and therefore it's cultural, the fact that the dawn chorus exists and that they sing in it is inherited. It's part of their DNA. And what that means is that the dawn chorus has evolved. And it's evolved for a particular purpose. It's evolved, I think, to avoid the costs of competition. Instead of birds having to patrol the boundaries of their home range and see off defend it, they can sing. And by singing, they create safety and community. They live in a way where the whole possibility of conflict between their own kind and between their neighbours is minimized through this glorious phenomenon of the dawn chorus that we hear every breeding season. So that got me thinking about the way that nature works in terms of resolving conflicts. And as I said, we live in box ironbark woodland, and one of the species that I enjoy encountering most mornings that I go for a walk is the black wallabies that live in the bush here. They tend to be quieter than the kangaroos, that they tend to be more single animals rather than hanging out in mobs. And they stay in the bush. They don't really feed out on the surrounding agricultural land much. So I think of them as being quiet, kind of introverted characters. So for the first time in 20 years, when I came across two of them having a bit of a biffo, it was really a surprise to me. I'd never encountered this behavior before. And fortunately, I was able to make a video of it. And what I'd like to show you is what I'd like you to notice in this. So this is two males who are, they're in a classic male on male fight situation. They are negotiating their status as breeding animals. But what I'd like you to notice is the formality of the movements, the way that they interact. I think it's almost like sumo wrestlers. They've got strict rules of engagement and sort of a formalized behavior of engagement. You can see this animal at the end is really tired. It's panting. This is a very physical interaction, and yet it's almost more a ballet. You can sense that there are particular movements involved. They put their arms around each other's shoulders before they start their. It's like they're trying to upend each other. These behaviors, each species has this kind of behavior. It's called agonistic behaviors. And if you look up the word agonistic in the dictionary, you'll find it associated with things like conflict, fighting, aggression, and so on. In fact, the word agonistic is the opposite of antagonistic. What animals are doing, and each species seems to have its own agonistic behaviors, which once again, like birds in the dawn chorus, are inherited, they're part of its DNA. The formality of these ritual behaviors seems to avoid the costs of actual physical injury through conflict. And one of the most spectacular examples that I've seen, I wish I had a video to show you, but I don't, is, it's probably on YouTube somewhere, is of giraffes. The way that they do it is two animals will walk towards each other, two males will walk towards each other, stand next to each other, and they'll pull their necks back and then swing them together, and the two necks will impact it, and the dust flies. You can hear it for a long distance away. It is very physical. But if they didn't get that swing right, if they didn't synchronize their behavior and get that swing connecting properly, it would be so easy for an animal to overbalance, lose its balance, and if it fell, it could break a leg. It could be really serious. So it would be easy for animals to kind of fight and injure each other, but they don't. They actually work together and they resolve their conflicts, and the defeated animal, see our language, the animal that secedes, or what's the word I'm looking for, sort of acknowledges the superiority of the other one. That's not right either. Yeah. The one that moves away, it lives to breed possibly another day. So these behaviors are found throughout the animal kingdom, and it just really got me thinking about the way that we understand the functioning of nature, that these behaviors that avoid the costs of competitive interactions, violent, aggressive interactions, are absolutely pervasive. So I'll come back to that in a moment. But following on this theme about the way that nature actually functions, I started to think, well, it's about not just resolving these kind of conflicting situations, but actually creating cooperation. And you'll be familiar that cooperative relationships, particularly things like symbiotic relationships, relationships that might benefit, mutualistic relationships might benefit one party or the other, or simply to facilitate processes in nature, are ubiquitous. They're found throughout the biosphere. So for instance, in marine environments, the relationship between coral polyps and algae is absolutely, it's the foundation of the richest marine ecosystems that we have in coral reefs. They've endured for hundreds of millions of years. The relationship between mycorrhizal fungi and the roots of plants, it looks as though it goes back to relationship between algae and fungi, and it's possibly the relationship that has allowed plants to evolve and become, and to occupy terrestrial habitats. And it's not only the relationship between the mycorrhizal fungi that extract nutrients from the rocks for the plants, but it's also between the fungi and bacteria, bacteria can go into the matrix of the soil, much smaller areas, and draw nutrients back. So it's incredibly complex relationships that underlie the whole of our terrestrial vegetation. Then there's, for the last 100 million years, there's the relationship between flowering plants and pollinators, birds, small mammals, and insects. There's also the relationship between fruiting plants. This is a cassowary poo, and it's been estimated that around about 200 rainforest plants require their seeds to go through the digestive tract of a cassowary to germinate. This photograph, you may not sense that there'd be a connection between plankton and mountain ranges, but I was fascinated to come across research recently that indicates that there are. Plankton are around 2 million years old, and they've been in the world's oceans for that period of time. And as their tiny bodies die, they settle down to the to the ocean floor and become integrated with the ocean sediments. Those sediments move on the ocean plates, and when two plates come together in an impact zone, because the ocean sediments are rich with the carbonaceous bodies of plankton, it's like graphite. It's a lubricant. And so instead of two plates just coming together and going thump and maybe buckling a little bit, but basically not doing very much, instead one plate will slide under the other and push up a mountain chain. And because these massive mountain chains like the Andes and the Himalayas, in this case, that's Mount Everest on the left-hand side there. Because these massive mountain chains have been formed, it's changed the planet's weather, it's brought a lot more moisture to the land, it's created large rivers and sedimentation and so on. So a relationship between living things and the lithosphere, the geology of our planet. The relationships just get more and more fascinating and rich and deep. And I started to think, well, how does this work in terms of what we're hearing? Because if you think about the biosphere and the lithosphere of our planet, you can also think in terms of it, and I haven't really got the right word for it, but a kind of a communicative realm as well, a communication sphere, if you like, that aspect of the planet that is talking to itself, talking to each other, species one to another, and so on, all these behaviors that we've seen, the dawn chorus and so on. And one of the things that really made me aware of how cooperation can work in a communicative sense was when I was in Sulawesi. It's an island in Indonesia. Beautiful primary tropical rainforest, full. You just know that you are surrounded by extraordinary biodiversity in these kind of places. And yet there'd be mornings I'd be out there with my microphones and I'd be standing there because it's pretty much dead silent. There's so little going on, and I'd be, it looks beautiful, but there's not much to be heard. And then a single bird might fly in, and I'd switch on my microphones. Over the next few minutes, more and more birds would arrive. And after a few minutes, everywhere everywhere you looked, there was movement. There were birds crawling up tree trunks and coming through the undergrowth and hanging off branches, hanging off leaves. There was movement and birds everywhere. My friends in India, naturalist friends, call this a bird wave. And it's a really good word for it, but probably a better way, a more sort of technically correct way is saying that it's a mixed species feeding flock. And in tropical regions, they can be an absolute phenomenon. It's just amazing to be surrounded, be immersed in this feeding flock, because there could be dozens of species and possibly hundreds of individuals. And my friends in India said, you know, one of the birds that we often notice is one of the first birds to arrive is this species. It's a racket-tailed drongo. You can see the rackets at the bottom of its tail there. And the thing about the drongo is that it's a fabulous mimic. It mimics all the other birds in the forests. And when it turns up and it's singing everyone else's song, they said, yeah, it's a bit like the drongos are the Pied Pipers. They draw all the rest of the species through the forest with them. And all the communications that you've just heard, all that twittering of the flock, holds the integrity of the flock together. So what I realized I'm hearing is a form of communication which is widespread in the bird world. This isn't just tropical forests. We have mixed species foraging flocks in the woodlands here, particularly in the winter in the non-breeding season. Thornbills, fantails, rufous whistlers, robins, weebills, wrens, they all form this flock that kind of moves through the forest, little satellas coming up and down the branches, and they all move through together, all twittering away the whole time. And in each of these flocks, there is a sentinel species, a species that is just really alert to the world and alert for dangers and predators, and they have really recognizable and sharp alarm calls. In the Indian forests, it's the Racket-Tailed Drongo, very alert bird with a really sharp, piercing alarm call. In Australia, it's the thornbills, which give a beautiful high frequency little call. It's almost easy to miss it, but they're so alert and attentive, and because they're often up in the canopy, they see the predators coming. So you have species that join these foraging flocks, and they kind of outsource their predator awareness to these sentinel species, and the whole flock is held together by sound, that they can hang upside down like the satellas do. They can probe the bark, and they don't have to. They can get on with their business because other birds are doing the safety aspect for them. So this is found all around the world, from the northern hemisphere to the south to the tropics. And so sound creates this cooperation between species. So I was beginning to get a sense of just the rich interaction of the natural world, and that it doesn't function according to this survival of the fittest, each one out for itself kind of paradigm. It's very much, you know, these behaviors are so deeply embedded in the evolutionary story of the planet that we live on. In wrapping up, I want to play you one more recording. And it comes from this place. This is Waratah Flat in East Gippsland. And just this recording was made in 1995. It's one of our earliest recordings. It was just the most fabulous place. It had a real impact on us in terms of bringing us to a point of realizing just how important listening to nature was. So. I'm playing you this because this place, this habitat no longer exists. The mega fires of a couple of years ago, we watched in concern and sadness as the fires overran Waratah Flat, Ellery Creek, all these amazing forests that we'd recorded in at the very beginning of beginning to listen ourselves. And what I realized out of this is that simply conservation, conserving and putting land aside, doing the kind of scientific monitoring of species, all of this kind of stuff, none of this was sufficient for the crisis that we're currently facing. When we have climate change, when we have unprecedented events like these fires, these small sort of on the sidelines kind of activities of conservation simply don't count. we're talking about a climatic change and disruption to our planet, which is systemic to the way the planet functions. And so our response has to be systemic. And a part of my reason for speaking to you this evening is because the kind of things that Aila and others are talking about go to the absolute root of the problem, which is that we have to live differently on this planet to really address this problem. And I think listening has a lot to tell us. I think nature is actually telling us the most important things, which is that we need to listen, we need to live differently. And specifically, the way that we need to live differently. For me, if there's one take-home message from everything that I've heard in my travels around the world, my recording and my listening, is that nature is not a competitive system. That's not to say that it's always cooperative. Sometimes there's simply a mutual accommodation of species. They live alongside each other. They even share the same resources without competing. And yet our systems are based in competition. Everything that we do, our economic system, our political system, our social systems, the way that we educate our children, you've got to succeed. All of this, every success is based on somebody else's failure. Every winner is at the cost of somebody else being a loser. And this is a paradigm which is so deeply embedded in the way that we look at the world as a Western culture and the way that we exploit the world. So for me, if we can learn anything from nature, and if we can progress towards an ecological or an ecocentric civilization, it needs to be to examine and rethink this relationship that we have with each other and with the process of life, that we need to think about developing our own agonistic behaviors, which humans do. We have diplomacy, we have listening to each other, we have empathy and caring for each other. And if we can start deploying those as the paradigms of our civilization and our interactions on everything from the way that we work, the way we set up our communities, right through to our geopolitics, we've got a chance of doing the things that we need to save ourselves and this beautiful planet that we live on. So I will leave it there, and thank you all for listening, and I'll drop out of screen share and we can have some discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew. Every time you talk and share your learnings, and it's just very moving. And there's a lot of people saying, thank you, this is amazing and inspiring. And that's not to be cheesy in any way. I think it's a remarkable reminder, particularly to those of us who are not Indigenous and those of us who are not living on the land, how much is going on around us that our society, institutionally speaking, has blocked out and pretended is just an object or human property. These entire communities, it's so exciting and heartbreaking as well. So yeah, just wonderful. Normally it takes a minute or two for some questions to come in. I think today people will probably take a bit longer. People saying thank you so much, very profound, moved and inspired. So I might have a question for you, Andrew. Just some nuts and bolts questions. How many decades have you been doing this work now?
Coming up on 3, but it's difficult to put a figure on these things, because when I was a kid, I was mucking around the creek, even though I grew up in the middle of Sydney. I'd go down to the creek and I'd be coming across tawny frogmouths roosting, and every weekend I'd go up to Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park and just go bush, and I really developed an interest in birds at that time. I was actually drawing them, and I went into the Australian Museum in Sydney one day and met the curator of birds, who said, look, you come in anytime you want, school holidays or whatever, and you can use our collection of skins. And they've got this massive collection of every species in the country to study the plumage and details of and so I've kind of had a background in just a love of nature and fascination with it. ever since I was a kid. You know, I'd be the one on the cricket team that was assigned to the outfield, and I'd be standing there watching the plovers, you know, while the cricket ball was sailing over my head and people are screaming, "Skeoch!"
That sounds like my experience with my life too, always standing, looking at the wrong thing, but really it was the right thing. That's wonderful, Andrew. There's some nice questions coming through, an important one here. Where are your recordings stored? And is there some kind of publicly available archive? Did you want to pop something in the chat there, Andrew, and show folks how to find them?
So our website is listeningearth.com, one word, Listening Earth. And we've got recordings up on Spotify. We've got recordings up on Bandcamp. I'm gradually filling up our whole catalogue. We've released about, I think we're up to about 105 recordings now from around the world. So as things go on, I'll just continue that in the background. But yeah, either off our website, we've got a streaming part of our website as well. Or Spotify or Bandcamp, you can stream as well. So there's lots of places to listen to the actual recordings. The raw recordings, the archive of recordings, I haven't decided quite what I'll do with it yet. It may go to Cornell University in America or the British Library or the CSIRO, maybe all three.
Definitely all three. And Zol has asked the perfect question that I was going to ask. Yes, he has written a book and he's so humble he hasn't mentioned it. Andrew, please plug your draft book to us, and when will it be available? Or is it finished? Is it available now?
It's not available yet. I'm doing a final edit, and we'll do all of the preparation over the next couple of months. I'm hoping to have it actually published by March next year.
Okay.
The book is called Deep Listening to the Natural World, which is my opening slide this evening. And as yet, I haven't quite worked out how the distribution is going to work in this country, but there will be certainly something on our website that will point you in the right direction.
And we'll point to your thing that's pointing to the right direction. We will promote it happily.
Thanks, Michelle. And I noticed that James has put a link up to the streaming aspect of our website as well on your
Earth Art page?
I'm not sure where it is. I forget now, but yeah,
I know that we were talking about it. James is there actually. He's nodding thumbs up. So the Earth Arts website for Ayla, which I will share in a moment, that's where we promote some of the artists that we work and collaborate with. So that's wonderful. Yeah, we talked about doing that. Thank you, James, for getting that done. That's wonderful. Andrew, there's a lovely question here, which I think is nice. Sarah has asked, what is your favorite bird? And what's one of your favorite stories about a particular one?
Oh, Lordy.
Obviously, the crow story is beautiful.
Yeah.
That realization you had that he came down and went, no, I can't eat that. I don't eat that.
Yeah. Very disappointing.
Yes.
There are so many, aren't there? I mean, it's sort of like saying, well, who's your favorite friend? Or, you know,
Sorry.
I mean, maybe we do have favorite friends. The golden whistler is one that I particularly love. We have them in the bush here, and they've got a beautiful song in Australia, and I heard them in the Solomon Islands, and it turns out that it's not only a different race of the golden whistler in the Solomons, but it's probably a different species, and they just sound wild. They're just so loud. But what I realized is that I'm hearing the process of evolution between our birds and the ones that are only a few thousand kilometers away. They look so similar, and yet they sound wildly different. And that sound itself is a part of the evolutionary journey. As a matter of fact, birds will they diverge in terms of their sound more quickly than they do in terms of behavior, habitat, plumage, and so on. So in a way, sound creates the bird as much as anything else. And it just gave me this realization that communication is really absolute. To understand the communicative, sort of that communicative sphere of the planet is to understand how nature works. Yeah. And just coming back to something that you were intimating at earlier on, I think often when we talk about nature, we think of nature as a place. It's somewhere that we like to go. It's the bush. It's it's a tree that we sit under, go fishing, whatever it is. Nature isn't a place. Nature is not a noun. It's a verb. Nature is a process, and we're part of that process. We are alive in this world as other things are. And when you start thinking of nature as this active, animate thing that we can perceive through looking and listening, then you're starting to get a sense of the movement of things. You sort of start moving away from protecting things and places into being protecting the process. And that's a really different paradigm shift.
It's beautiful. I'm actually writing that down. I tend to capture the little snippets of goodness in our chat. Just think if there's other questions. It's been really special to hear these interactions and deeper the understanding about the bird sounds.
Well, it's what I love about what you folks do at AELA, Michelle and James, and probably many of you on this thing this evening, is that you've not only got obviously a care for nature, but you're prepared to move beyond that kind of Western idea of what our relationship with nature is, and be open to it being other things. And I think things like giving the earth legal entity, it just doesn't make sense by Western material transactional ideas. But when you start thinking about nature being a transformative interaction, and that comes back to this thing about nature talking to you.
Yeah.
So often in a Western way, you would think, well, nature's not saying anything to you.
Yeah.
It's just a thing. No, it is. It's talking to us. It wants us to change, wants us to understand, because it's important for us to grow up and become responsible.
Well, I agree. And Andrew, I've mentioned this before, but one of the loveliest moments, I think, I work with the wonderful Mary Graham, and we're working on a book together. And one of our early conversations was talking about how, I love sitting in the garden and looking at the trees. And she goes, well, don't forget, when you're looking at them, they're looking back at you. Yep. And I know it's a simple thing and it's almost a cliche, but for someone like me who is so madly passionate about the living world, to realize that she's totally right. And in your case, the birds are talking to you, the trees are watching you and being with you. You're so part of it. It's like, it's almost a cliche once you've worked it out, but it is the most beautiful feeling. And I love how Mary Graham talks about, the land is the source of the law and you are not alone. These are these two premises. And I think your listening has shown, when you're out in those places, you can hear all of the other, beautiful creatures, the other life forms doing their thing. It's delicious.
And if I could just say one final thing, because I know that so many activists they feel a sense of despair and sometimes burnout. But what you're saying, nature's on our side. Nature wants us to learn, and I think of it literally as growing up, because we're acting at the moment as if we're spoiled teenagers.
Yeah.
And nature has processes that we really don't fully understand yet, feedback loops and interactions. Scientists are looking at them, positive feedback loops, negative feedback loops. We don't know which way the climate is going to tilt the planet, where the tipping points are. You talk about planetary boundaries. We don't understand the world that we live in. We're starting to get some inkling of it. Certainly we're getting an inkling of the complexity, but we don't really fully understand it. And yet we're a part of it. And I think to think of ourselves as being, we're stuffing things up or blah, it's much more subtle than that. We're a part of a process, and that evolutionary process, nature wants us to grow up the same as we want to still be here and be alive. So be aware that nature's actually on our side. It'll talk to you as an individual, and it'll speak to you and your heart and soul in your life if you're open to it. But as a species, it's going to provide us with the circumstances that we require to make the changes in the way that we live that we're going to be required to do. And they may not be pleasant. I'm not, they could be even tragic. But the sooner we get our heads around the fact that nature is shaping us, rather than us shaping nature, which is the Western paradigm.
Yeah.
It's for me, it's a source of comfort as much as anything else, you know, to realize that most of our history has been shaped by the opportunities nature has provided, even fossil fuels. The fact that nature's been sequestering away fossil fuels for millions and millions of years. It's like nature's done this. You know, we've just gone, oh, how about that? We can burn this shit. Yeah. So, you know, nature still holds all the cards. And I don't think we're here to be a kind of evolutionary failure. You know, we represent something really extraordinary as a species. Our ability to understand and to create and to work in. You know, we are the custodial species, as so many indigenous cultures understand. And I think nature's going to continue to shape us towards that realization.
I do hope so, Andrew.
Comforting, I suppose. You know,
it totally is, and it's a very different perspective, as you say, from a lot of our feelings and concerns and despair at the moment. So it's lovely to hear those positive views.
Yeah, and I mean, that despair and sadness and frustration is very real. I'm not wishing to you know, diminish it, but there's also realizing that we as a species are part of something far vaster than we understand.
Yeah, and I think if we could respect the mystery and not wreck the joint, those two simple points, you know, respect that you don't know what's going on. Exactly. Hey, we could have ended on that very profound note, but there are a couple of nice questions. I just wanted to ask, Louise has asked, Andrew, have you recorded sounds in rivers and creeks? And I have to say, this is a special favorite of mine. All of it's beautiful. But one of the first times I ever came across this kind of work was with a woman, James and I were together, I think, and with some other folks, and they dropped the mic down into this little creek. And it was like a jungle, a cacophony of little dudes down under the water, and it blew my mind. It was so exciting.
Let me play you a little bit.
Oh, please, yes.
Jump back into my thingy widget here.
Your thingy widget.
Yeah, here we
There's
go.
some lions eating things, yes.
Yeah. That was talking about predation and that it's not what we think it is. Anyway, go on. So this is a little a water beetle, a skimmer, and this is the sound of, this is a small creek locally to us.
Absolutely gorgeous. I love it. Yeah, absolutely gorgeous. All right. Yeah. So we're sort of out of time, but folks, please don't worry. We love Andrew and Andrew loves us, and we'll have him back many a time, including to promote his book next year. I can't wait. There was a really great question actually about your book. Will it have those QR code thingy whatsits? That's my wording, not theirs. Will there be XR code sounds in your book?
Yeah, the way I'm going to do it is simply there'll be an introductory page and it'll have a single link. And you go to that single page and there's going to be, I think I'm up to about 260 sound files on it now.
Excellent.
And they'll all be referenced to the text. So as you read through, if I'm talking about something, it's no good me talking about it. You need to hear it.
Yes.
So you can either listen at the time you're reading, or you can bulk listen before or after a chapter, or however you want to do it. But they're all going to be in one place and easy to find and access. So
fantastic.
And I figured that's going to work whether you're on a tablet or on a book in the sunshine in the corner, or whatever's going to work.
That is absolutely lovely. So before
we get to hear those golden whistlers.
Yes. No, I'm really curious now, and I think, sorry, I'm just going to share screen. Oh gosh, you've seen the inside of this is disastrous. Look at me. It's been a long, weird couple of days. Please hold, ladies and gentlemen, while Michelle gets her act together. What I wanted to do in a graceful, slick fashion, and it completely failed, was to remind everyone about the other cool things that are coming up this week and next week, not to take away from the wondrousness of Andrew's talk. But when you go to our website and click on Earth Laws Month this week, we've kicked off tonight with Andrew's really inspiring and very deep discussion. I've absolutely loved it. And you can see all the other events that we've had so far. All of those recordings will be available in a couple of weeks on our website. And in terms of the arts and expressing yourself, we had a beautiful session last week with Simon Kerr and Robin Davidson about performing for the earth through music and theatre. We've had a lot of law sessions, and I won't go back into the ones we've already had, but I did want to give a plug, particularly by joining us tonight and listening to Andrew talking about his work. You might be interested in some caring for the oceans tomorrow with some lovely people from around the Pacific. Dal Jones will be talking about nature, positive futures, and the world of design and buildings and weird, clunky things, but are really important. And the lovely folks from the Blue Mountains Creative Arts Network will be giving a talk about some of their work, trying to think about regenerative and rethinking out their entire culture up in the Blue Mountains. Beautiful discussion with Tim Hollow about his book, Living Democracy. A little bit of governance stuff. It's not strictly legal, but do join us for ecological law and governance and more challenging the world of green extractivism. And then look, there's even more the week after, which I won't talk about. And a quick plug, do have a think about joining us for even an hour online for our 10th birthday party, which we've changed the date so we can actually combine it with.
Oh, it's on my birthday.
Oh no, that's a good and bad thing. Well, you'll have to jump on for the hour and we'll sing happy birthday to you and Ayla.
Oh, that'd be lovely.
That would be awesome.
That might be quite a mouthful.
And you can play some bird songs for us.
I'll look forward to it. That sounds like fun.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Now we'll be having you come back very soon for some more yarns, and definitely with the book. Someone has just asked, where do we find the recordings of the sessions? The website will have right now where the program is. You'll go in and it'll be lovely. You'll just click on any event you're interested in. It'll have the blurb and it'll have the recording. So that's earthlaws.org.au, ELM 2022. That's Earth Laws Month. And James already put in, but I do want to give a plug for our Earth Arts program, eartharts.org.au. We're going to be sharing some of the beautiful artworks that folks connected to the Earth Arts Collective. We'll be putting on our virtual gallery. COVID knocked us around in terms of preparing for in-person art exhibitions, which we used to do. But yeah, we're going to have some lovely celebrations online. But enough of all the walking advertisements. Andrew, as you wrap up your book, good luck with all your editing, and maybe some final thoughts on what will happen after your book. Have you had any moments to think about any new projects after that, or are you up to your eyeballs in the editing?
I'm sort of up to my eyeballs at the moment, and
Yes.
and I'll say that the book has really grown out of the whole pandemic because, like a lot of us, we've had time just to sit quietly without traveling and going around. I imagine that once the book's out there, I'll be doing my song and dance in front of audiences, and I've started to do that already, and it's really lovely just to be able to share this live. So
good.
Yes.
Well, that might be something we can do too. We'll bring you up to Brisbane or something. Get you up here.
Yeah, well, it'd be lovely. A birthday celebration. We can stick a candle in the cake. And the chat for today is that.
Anyone can copy that. In fact, if you, as co-host, you should be able to save the chat if you want to. But if anyone else wants a copy, just let me know. We keep copies of them all. And if you want, often people share references and comments and lovely things. So yeah, it's worth saving. And if you have any trouble with it, any of you, including Andrew, do let me know. We will have a copy of it for you. All
right. And look, I'd just like to say not only thank you to yourself, Michelle, and James, and your team, because you do such an awesome job. But to each of you for coming along this evening. And, if any of you have got questions or things, you're welcome to email me off our website or directly. So, yeah, my email address is listeningearth@gmail.com if you want to add that into the chat as well. But I'd welcome communicating with any of you. And, if you want me to come and do a talk or something, hey.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, definitely shoot a note to Andrew if you want to, if you feel inspired and excited by this. Obviously your other friends, colleagues and networks will be too. All right.
Sorry, Andrew, can you say that again, please?
Oh, email address. It'll probably be in the chat somewhere.
I put it in the chat, Zol, but it's a listening. So listeningearth, all one word, @gmail.com.
Yep.
Lovely. All right. Well, we will release you back into your wild so that you can have your dinner and listen to your nighttime forests. And yes, as Andrew said, thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. A lovely way to kick off. I think it's week 3 of Earth Laws Month. And Andrew, good luck finishing your book. It is no easy task. So good luck, and we can't wait to get our hands on a copy.
Thank you all.
Thank
Good night.
you. Thanks, everyone.